Let's make planting this year's garden a lot easier with the Planter app. This app is packed full of features. It has companion and combative planting, which are indicated by green and red circles. It has a simple drag and drop interface. It has 80 plus plants and thousands of varieties. All the info is needed to grow veggies, including when to start seeds, transplant, and harvest, the ability to create custom plants and varieties, a growing guide with in-depth articles to supplement the quick info in the app, not to mention that you can view it and use it both on your PC and on your mobile device, so you can always be planting your garden on the go. This app is used in my garden year-round to plan the upcoming seasons, reference the last year's seasons so I know when to rotate, and it also helps me to learn more about companion planting using the visual cues. When you create your garden, it's going to be based on the dimensions, and each block is going to be a square foot. I've had a lot of fun using this app, and the Planter app, which is spelled Planter, is available in your app store on both Google and Apple. So what are you waiting for? Get out there and plan your garden, and use the link below to get a discount on the Planter app.
To have a good harvest, one must plant good seeds and must also use the right kind of fertilizer. The carrots have grown large and firm. How good they will taste.
Batavia, I don't remember, was it the last episode we did or this episode where we brought up monocropping?
It was 2 episodes ago.
Was it 2 episodes ago? Okay.
I don't know, but who's gonna like really say no?
Yeah, no, don't talk about it. So yeah, we're gonna talk about monocropping this show, and it's not gonna be about mono, so don't worry. You can go kiss your plants and you won't get sick. So, look, did you hear the silence? My joke didn't land. It's terrible.
Well, there was like this introduction of a joke, and then I didn't expect you to pick it up, and then when you picked it up, I didn't expect it to like fall that flat. So this is real here, man. This is all organic, man. If it's not funny,
look, in my own head, I think I'm a comedian sometimes, but I'm really not. But do you monocrop at all?
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't, without this show, I wouldn't refer to it as that, but yes.
Yeah, I mean, you got to give a term to it. You know what I mean?
Well, I don't have to do anything. Okay, all right.
Yes,
fine,
you do.
Fine,
you
fine,
have
fine.
to.
Let's just say that I was monocropping before I knew monocropping was a thing. Like obviously we see, like fields of food, and I get that, but it didn't occur to me. I haven't always done it though.
So I've been gardening now almost 20 years by myself, like on my own. And I don't think I've ever really monocropped until this year. Isn't that crazy? And let me go ahead and say this. Monocropping, in case you don't know, is planting one crop in a raised bed or in a garden space. So all onions, all whatever, just one thing. So,
and it comes from, like, if you go to look at farming, right? So that bit of land would have a single crop, so I love the way that we can take our gardens, and because it's all about growing things, right? We take our gardens and then still pinch off of what's something that could be traditionally a farming reference, right? So yeah, as soon as I started growing a lot more things, monocropping became my jam.
Yeah. And if you're not a patron or an Apple subscriber, you might, first of all, you can support the show that way, but we definitely talk about farming and gardening in the last one that just released. So you guys might want to check that out. It should be interesting. It's something we've thought about for a long time. But you're exactly right. It's like using these terms is to help describe it. But I mean, what's the benefit? You know what I mean? Like that's always been my problem. Yes, in the back row.
You will have to refer to the episode when it comes to the benefit from a farming perspective. But for me, it's a time management thing for sure. It absolutely helps me keep track of the thing that's in that particular space, in that bed, much better than I could if it's spread across. Every single bed doesn't have a single crop in it. Yeah. So my entire garden is not, every bed isn't, I'm not applying monocropping to every single bed. But it's, I'd say, a large bit of what I do, I have the same things growing in the same space. And when I need to go and check on the tomatoes, it was great to be able to go to the cage, baby. Yeah, a little bit more whining there.
You keep bringing it up.
No, I'm comfortable when I bring it up. I just never want you to bring it up. That's how that works.
Yes, ma'am.
And I could spend that time, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, however long, and then wrap up and then feel accomplished and move on. So yeah, that's one of the benefits that I've experienced.
Yeah, and I mean, actually, I do take that back. Since I've started growing sweet potatoes, ever since I started, I did monocrop those just because they take up so much space.
Yeah.
And I realized with those, the real big benefit for that was like, I knew that crop didn't need a whole lot of work. So I could just walk away from it basically and just manage it one step at a time, which was good instead of getting in there and be like, what's going on here? What's going on there? Okay, this plant, it's all the same in there. So
that's actually it's the other side of what so something that's more high maintenance, I'm able to focus on in that one space, but things that are low maintenance, right? That's a bed you don't have to worry much about, which is also super cool.
Yeah. Unlike tomatoes or something, they can be a little bit higher maintenance sometimes. I know people, don't scoff at me. I know I said it out loud. It's okay. It's the quiet thing said out loud, right? Is that the terminology these days?
The quiet part out loud. I don't know if they're saying it that much anymore.
Oh.
But we could still say it because we make our own rules.
Yeah, because we're old, that's why.
I had that moment of the uncertainty around my tomatoes this year. And then I was just like, it's okay. It's all going to be fine. And then I took some tomato sauce out of the freezer, the red pepper tomato sauce that I love. And I was like, it better be okay because I need this. It's so good. Oh, was it so good? Not a drop of sweetener in it, just wonderful. So anyway, yeah, definitely. Tomatoes are sometimes finicky. Sometimes.
So what are you monocropping then?
Well,
this
just
year,
barely. Same idea with sweet potatoes. I have a hard time with sweet potatoes, leaving sweet potatoes to be the only thing in a bed. So I have sweet potatoes and then cucumbers, kind of growing up the trellis. So I don't know if that counts necessarily.
Well, that's something I was going to... Can we put an asterisk in there since you're the queen of asterisk? Mm-hmm. Because, those trellis sides, you can't count those because not everything grows up a trellis. So I'm in support of that.
Okay, good. Potatoes, white potatoes, I mean. And then I have... One of the benefits of this is some of my space, they're just so small when it comes to some of these beds. Like I have narrow beds that go 8 by 1.5 feet or something. And, you're only going to get a handful of plants in there and it's just fine to plant all of the same thing.
Yeah.
I think is that it? Because I put corn in a little bitty bed. And then I am doing like one edge of onions, which are going to be green onions. That's a whole conversation. We'll talk about that in the garden update.
That's a whole nother one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm doing a corn bed. I have a potato bed. And then I have a potato bed with a trellis behind it. So there's something on the trellis. I got a squash bed with a trellis on it. So there's something on that trellis. I'm doing a sweet potato bed. And I have a pepper bed. It's not all peppers, but it's about 75% peppers, which is the closest I've gotten to monocropping peppers. And I'm excited about that this year. So we'll see how that works. The corn I wanted to do, so you mentioned corn. How big is the bed you're using for the corn?
It's a 2 by 4 foot bed, really small. And then I have one more space that I'm planting corn in that I haven't planted in yet. I'm waiting on the seeds to get here. Good grief. This is actually, by the time this airs, I would have had planted that last bit of corn.
Right.
And that's going to be in one of the larger front yard beds. Maybe so either the 36-inch round bed or I'm going to plant it out because my extension service says I can plant corn through like the first week of July. So I've only been growing corn a handful of years and don't know that I've planted it that late, but I'm going to give it a whirl. And if that's the case, then I'll put corn behind my broccoli as I Google to see if they hate each other. Are they arch nemesis?
Probably. If you want to do it, that probably means you got to change your plan.
Mm-hmm, of course.
Yeah, my corn, I dedicated a whole bed to it. And I did that for pollination purposes. So I knew that if it's wind pollinated. So if I messed up and I put too little in it, then I would totally screwed up my train of thought.
Dude, that's literally my seeds being delivered.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah, man. Oh, that's wild. You
talked it into fruition.
Yeah.
I didn't want to take a chance of messing it up, because this is the most I've ever gone into corn. Mm-hmm. So we'll see. I'm not a big corn fan, but I'm excited to see what comes out of it. Now, I do also do, I have a bed that's, I don't know if there's a term for it. I don't know, family planting, like familial planting. Mm-hmm, so I've got the garlic and onion bed. Mm-hmm, so it's like the same family. And I guess you could even say that like if you did like peppers and tomatoes and stuff like that, which I think is it's a step down from monocropping, but I think it works. What do you think?
I was actually just talking about this on like a Instagram reel / YouTube short. Even with all of the struggles in the last year over tomatoes, I have tomatoes in a new space, one of a few new spaces, and I have tomatoes and peppers planted together or near each other. And that's like a thing, that I've done. And I don't, they're in the nightshade family. And so one article will say, oh, that's frowned upon. Another article will say that's just fine. They're companions. So like I'm for it. I'm for grouping those kinds of crops together.
Go ahead.
I think there's just something about like some of these things we have to bend as far as these rules to see if it works for our space, because we just don't have the, quarter of an acre to say, all right, this 50-foot row I'm dedicating to X. That's just not the way that many of our spaces are set up.
Well, not only that, but it's hard to dedicate the right amount of spacing. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I mean, if I spaced everything like the seed packet says, I'd have like 2 plants in a bed.
Yeah, man.
That's
not the way I roll.
No. And I mean, I think it's a good workaround to that, though, because it's like, with the tomatoes and peppers, like, the peppers aren't going to get as big as the tomatoes. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. They're going to produce later than the tomatoes will start setting, generally speaking. So,
and depending on the way that you're pruning, if you're, like, I don't know it until I see it, but I'm going to say a foot to 18 inches, I'm pruning off from the ground up for my tomato plants. And if I'm doing that, that gives the pepper plants like just enough room to like stretch their arms a little bit. So it works out really well. And, I've never had, I'm trying to think, I probably shouldn't say ever, never. I don't think I've had, even with sick tomatoes that get hit by some cold towards the end of the season, my peppers seem to never be impacted by it, which kind of goes back to that whole question mark around planting them together.
Yeah, peppers are an interesting one. They are pretty resilient to cold. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I've always read like nothing less than 50, but I've, coming into the fall, like I get surprised about how they do. And for me, it's like I have my determinate tomatoes planted behind my peppers. So when they stop producing, I'll pull those tomatoes out and guess what's going to be left in that bed? Determinate or peppers all by themselves to stretch. So now I'll put something behind them. Don't get me wrong. And at that point in the year, see, here's my problem. At that point in the year, it's going to be too late to plant more peppers. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So that whole monocropping situation is it's tough to kind of build on. Like it's hard to get started and be like, all right, this year, because this is where I'm at. This year, I really want to do monocropping more. I did it over this spring a little bit. I kind of, I had 2 rows of lettuce and it worked out great. Wanted to do, wish I would have had a whole bed of it. But switching over as we get into it, and it's hard to kind of get on that bandwagon. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, I think you also have to consider, are you growing enough of things to even say, okay, there's a whole bed of it?
Yeah.
You know, there are a bunch of years where, you know, well, it's kind of hard because if I think back, there were times where I just wanted to grow a little bit of everything. And when I say everything, I'm talking about like 3 or 4 different crops. And then when you kind of move on, like I could do a bed full of carrots if I'm using one of my smaller beds. Your garden is a little more kind of consistent when it comes to the size of your beds. What do you do normally? 8x4 feet?
Yeah, I've got 6 8x4s and 2 3x6s.
Yeah. So when you talk about dedicating a bed, like you're talking about like your real space here. I can say dedicating a bed like it's again 2x4. So a good example of collards, which I didn't even bring up. How did that happen? I almost exclusively, monocrop my collards.
Because you eat a lot of them.
Yeah. I may squeeze in things like right now I have a bed in the backyard that has all collard greens. It's a 12x4 foot-ish bed. And then I have the row closest to me is like lettuce. But that's within a month. By the time this airs, that lettuce is going to be pulled out because it's going to bolt. Yeah. So that will leave nothing but collards in that space. And you also kind of fold in the way that which I'm sure you're going to get to, the way that you manage that bed. So for me, if I'm going to cover my greens, which I will, if I'm going to cover my greens, I need to put something under there that's going to benefit from the cover.
Yeah.
And I can't have collards kind of spread out all throughout my garden unless you truly believe in like that whole like pest confusion approach. But putting that aside for a moment, I'm not going to have every single bed covered with insect netting or tulle fabric or roll covers or whatever. So it makes sense to put all of those plants into a particular space.
Yeah. I mean, what I picked out of that was like pre-planning is everything.
Yeah, man. There's so much.
I saw the depression sink over your face immediately when I said that.
Yeah, I'm on the daily watch of picking cabbage worms.
Yeah, so I did, like I said, I did an onion and garlic bed. And my pre-planning was piss poor because I put the garlic in front of the onions. The garlic goes in months before the onions, so guess what it did? It shaded out 2 rows of onions. Yeah. If I would have swapped that, my harvest, which I'm not upset with my harvest, but it could have been a lot better and a lot, bigger. So it's just, that pre-planning aspect of it was kind of tough. And when I did that, that was the bed. Well, the corn really set it off, but as we started going into it, like I had anticipated like doing potatoes as a monocrop, corn as a monocrop, but I was doing everything, the others, the garlic and the onions so early. I had kind of anticipated that being the case. But like, I don't want to plant a whole bed of garlic. You know what I mean? Like I don't need, what is it? In a 4x8 bed, I can put like 150 garlics in there. Like I don't want that much garlic. So where does that leave me afterwards if I want, let's say that I was like, because how I am, I'll be like, I'm going to monocrop. I want to monocrop everything. And next thing you know, I've got 32 square feet of garlic and I have nothing to do with it. So it's like, where does that leave you afterwards? And it was, for me, it was like, well, let's put something with the same family in there. So it kind of worked out pretty good. I don't know what to do next year because I've been using the Planter app. Check it out, link below, to really work on that garden plan for the fall into the winter and try and get as much monocropped in there. But I like to grow so much that I'm finding myself like, well, maybe I won't grow this. Maybe I won't grow that. You know what I mean? Because I want.
It's limiting?
Yeah, well, it's my space is limiting. That's really what it is. If I want to do, my list of fall vegetables is pretty long. So it comes down to like, turnips or rutabagas. Well, I'd rather have rutabagas than turnips. You know what I mean? So like I can eliminate the turnips. Okay. It'd be the first year in a long time I haven't grown them, but there is that possibility. And then it's like spinach. I really want to grow a lot of spinach. But my problem is the way I have to harvest it, I don't want to put it in the middle of my bed.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Because it's going to be backbreaking to get in there and get it all. So it's kind of working through that process is what's been kind of hard for me.
Yeah, it's as I, and again, this isn't a woe is me, but as I kind of think about the orientation of some of my beds, when you mentioned being able to get to, the vegetables. So collards are, among other brassicas, are in the cage baby this year. And that is one of the beds that clearly I can only get to one side, get to the bed from one side. The other side of the bed is sitting up against my neighbor's fence. And boy, am I already starting to feel the pains of that.
Yeah.
So one way to resolve that would easily just be plant a single row in that space. And you put it in the middle of the bed, much easier to reach in. But I'm going to get 2 rows out of this easily, like quite literally doubling, what I'm growing. And it takes some navigating, which also kind of goes back to if everything is going to be the same size, if you're growing the same thing in the same space, everything is generally going to be the same size. Is that a benefit or not? Depends on what you're growing, I think.
That's the $1 million question.
Mm-hmm.
That is the $1 million question. And I mean, the other thing comes into when it comes time to planting. So like seeding something, I think monocropping is like, in my experience, I almost think it's a must.
Mm-hmm.
Not completely, but just keeping up with the watering, keeping up with all of that. I think it makes it so much easier. Now, if you're putting in transplants, I mean, it's 6 one way, half a dozen the other. If you ask me, it don't really matter. But I think if you'll see, like especially like carrots, my son, he's going to harvest his potatoes soon. Everybody say a prayer that he actually gets some. Mm-hmm. But then he wants to put in carrots behind it, so he wants to plant a whole bed of carrots. I'm like, here we go. But, he's going to have to go out there every day and water those carrots until they germinate. And then, I mean, every day he's going to have to add that in to keep it up. Mm-hmm. And I think he'll do it because it's only one bed. I think he'll be okay doing it. But it's one of those things, like if he did 1 row, it would be difficult. So, I mean, I'm going to ask him, like, do you want to do 1 row or do you want to do the whole thing of carrots? He's probably going to want to do the whole thing as carrots, but...
The big eyes of a kid.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing is, too, it's just like with the, with the garlic, it's like you do 1 full bed of carrots. Man, that's going to be a lot.
Of carrots, yeah.
That's a lot of carrots.
I did a 7 by 4 foot bed of garlic last year. And, you'd be surprised once you start using garlic in a bunch of recipes, for preserving. It can get used up pretty quickly. Actually, I'm pretty sure I planted in 3 different spaces, I know I planted in 3 different spaces for garlic now. And it's probably just a little bit more than what I planted last year. But again, these are like kind of little pockets of the garden. So it technically, it's sitting inside the cage baby, and it's a 2 by, it's the beds in between, or the space in between the beds. So it's like a 2 by 4 foot space, right? So that little space is only dedicated to that garlic. And that's that balance of getting the most out of your planting space. Is it more beneficial to put a single plant that would use that 2 by 4 foot space, or maybe 2 plants of something? Or do I put 30 cloves of garlic in there? Like that's the balance that when I come into the garden season with a garden plan, even in my head, or this year, actually like document it, on the computer, I get out there and just like, wait a minute. No, I could get more out of this space, without really compromising much. So earlier, just a couple of minutes ago, you said, about planning and how important it is when you're going to do something like that. Absolutely. You commented on, if you're direct sowing versus transplants. Direct sowing is hella hard if you're doing multiple crops in the same, like multiple plants in the same space as things come up, hella hard. Then you combine it with the weeds that are going to start coming up too. So
now the problem that I've had with, just regular planting where you're intermixing and stuff like that, is everything gets so spread out. And then, I practice crop rotation, and it makes it more difficult to rotate crops. You know what I mean? Like, it makes it a lot more difficult because I'm like, oh, well, I had a tomato there. So should I put a tomato here? Like, I don't know. But now, for instance, like, I know, like, hey, I did this tomato bed. I'm done. And it's like I'm going to do another second planting of tomato here in about a week, and then that'll be done. So I know that these things are coming up, and I know that, like, okay, these 2 beds next year, I don't plant potatoes in, or tomatoes. I've said this in a video, and I'm going to say it again. I cannot wait to stop saying tomato and potato back to back to each other. But moving them around like that is going to, I think it's going to help out because it'll make it a lot easier. Yeah. So I don't have any question, it's just eliminating that friction. Now, I will say this, since we were talking about garlic, I'm on my 2nd year of grocery store bought garlic. And the first year the harvest was, what would you say, Batavia? Pitiful?
No, I mean, you grew something. So there's that. But there was a little bit of squinting going on.
Yeah. Yeah, there for sure was. And so this year, so what I did is I saved the biggest cloves from last year, replanted. I did 1 double row. So basically, 32 heads of garlic in there. And the reason why I did so few, I would like to do more, was because I just didn't have enough. But I really wanted to see how it did. And this last video I did, I pulled a test one at the very end of the video. And boy, oh boy. So that brings me, it's a lot bigger. Let me just say this. The boy, oh boy, doesn't tell you anything. So it's a lot bigger. So by getting that better, bigger harvest, I don't need to grow as much garlic. Right?
Yeah.
So last year, the amount of plants I had, I probably planted about the same amount. I planted in a different style, but I bet this garlic will last longer, which, by the way, I'm not even done with the garlic I made last year. So there is that. Yeah. But I think it'll last longer because it'll stretch farther and it'll get used. So there is that aspect of it as well.
Yeah, there is. So if you fold in kind of shifting to the, praises, and I'm not at all suggesting if you're not planting in a monocrop fashion that you do, because there are some cons to it. So I'm not suggesting that, it's just conversation. But the idea of you planting a thing, generally you're expecting to pull all of that out at the same time. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't, succession sow or plant in that one space. Like that could happen. But a lot of times when we talk about this, it's we're putting all of the corn in at the same time. We're putting all of the tomatoes in at the same time, right? So unless you are managing different varieties, which you wouldn't want to do with corn, but unless you're managing different varieties, generally you're going to start to get, pull off those plants at the same time or harvest the plant at the same time. So then you have to ask yourself, are you really ready to deal with that many of the thing?
Ooh. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. I know you did that by design, and I appreciate that. Because you're exactly right. Monocropping, another benefit that don't worry, everybody, we're gonna beat it up a little bit too. We're not gonna make it sound like it's everything. But if you preserve, I can't think of a better thing than having everything done at once. Yeah. Because then I can go in, I can preserve it all, I can eat it fresh, and I can be done with it. I can move on. And even though everybody's like the determinate tomatoes, put them all at once, they don't all come on and have to come off on the same day. You will get waves of them for a period of time. So for me, we do a lot of canning of our tomatoes. So it's nice to have all of these tomatoes done and then go through it again. And I mean, we just pulled our onions, so we're about to put tomatoes back in and do a second planting. So we can, plan for that. But you also don't have to put the same variety in the bed. Nope. Or is that part of monocropping?
Well, I mean, I think in the truest sense, it probably is the same crop, same variety, like hard stop. But again, we're fudging some things here. So my collard green bed, I have collard greens spread out because I just had that many, but my collard green bed has 2 different varieties. One, an unnamed variety because the store didn't have the name of them besides, the name was collard greens. But the second variety that I'm growing is, Morris Head. It's like Morris Head cabbage collard or Morris Head collard cabbage. It must be Morris Head cabbage collard. Anywho, it's a more stout, variety. So it's, when you think about how a cabbage forms, these collards grow more like that. They even are described in some places as like not a cut and come again, like a single harvest crop. Yeah. So I'm growing those in front of this no name collard that I already see is going to get taller, right? So clearly 2 different varieties, but I'm treating them the same way as far as maintenance,
Yeah. So I'm glad that we're talking about varieties because I'm doing a bed of Brussels sprouts this year. Mm-hmm. The whole bed.
Yeah.
And if you've been listening to this for any amount of time, or if you've been watching me on Sandy Bottom Homestead on YouTube, you know that for 4 years, I have attempted to grow Brussels sprouts. Okay. Now I've planted them in different sections of my garden at the same time and tried to see which one grows better. Why the sad face?
Because, this is like,
It's getting depressing. But let me say this. So this year, I'm going to do a whole bed and I'm going to plant 3 different varieties in it. I'm doing an heirloom variety. I'm doing a quick maturing hybrid variety. And I'm doing a disease-resistant hybrid variety all in the same bed. And I'm going to see which one I get more off of. And so I know we talked about hybrids versus heirlooms before, but like I'm not going to save the seed for my collards. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's just not going to happen. Mm-hmm. Or not my collards, my Brussels sprouts. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I wanted to use this to my advantage. And then having them all in the same bed, I can really see which one does better, which one doesn't, what I need to focus on, what I don't need to focus on. So I'm excited to try that. The problem is I'm putting them in behind my potatoes, and my potatoes are coming out like 2 weeks before I thought they would, and I just started the seeds, so it looks like I might have a bare garden bed for a little while.
Let it rest for a while.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of where I'm thinking too, is just feed it, rest it, mulch it, move on. But by doing that, I can focus on that one bed and say, hey, this is my Brussels sprout bed. I can focus all of it. And then when I go to treat, because I like to treat for different pests and stuff like that, I can focus on this one bed instead of spreading it out all over the place.
I have, and speaking of Brussels sprouts, I have Brussels sprouts. Last year I grew them by accident. I had them
here's the flex. Here's the flex. Yeah.
By accident, I grew them almost in just, I think I had, instead of like 6 collard green plants is what I thought I had like 4 Brussels sprout plants and then 2 collards or something like that in the same bed. Anyway, this year I have 3 Brussels sprout plants, I think, 2 or 3 in one bed, and I have some kale. So I bring this up because of the kale. There's your lacinato kale, 1 plant. Your typical curly kale, there are a couple of different varieties, but your typical green curly kale. And then I have this purple kind of curly leaf kale. And it's interesting that you bring this up because I was pinching off some leaves. You'd be so proud of me. Well, we'll save why you'd be so proud of me. Anyway, I was pinching off some leaves, and it's that experience of I can see them grow side by side. Right. I'm already kind of forming an opinion in my head. Right. I'm going to take a couple of leaves off of each of these plants. I'm going to eat them at the same time. Right. So it is what I loved or liked even 5 years ago, maybe different than what I really love or like now. Yeah. So it gives me an opportunity to observe how they're growing, which plants are going to get bigger than the others, which are more sensitive. How is it that I have pests on just one of these? So there's something there. I think that's playing around with varieties in the same space. I think it's a really, really interesting experiment. And I think beneficial because you're not going to grow 3 varieties next year.
You sure?
No, I'm not sure, but I mean.
Well, I can tell you that I'm going to grow at least 2 until the seeds run out.
Okay.
I can tell you that. Yeah, and I did there's a video that's out that's hybrid. I don't know, it's hybrid and heirlooms together, whatever. And I talk about the whole thought process through doing this. And, you know, I've been pretty hardcore, like heirloom all the way. And I'm starting to kind of like see a purpose for every different kind of variety and stuff like that. And like I said earlier, like I've been gardening for almost 20 years now, which makes me sound really old. But I'm not, I promise. I promise I'm not. I don't have a cane yet. But it's one of those things where playing around with variety, and this is why I like starting seeds and stuff like that, playing around with the varieties and then testing them out side by side like this. And when I say testing them out, I don't think that, you know, to be fair to anything, testing them out is not like, hey, I've got one Roma or one hybrid tomato and one heirloom tomato side by side. It needs to be multiples because lots of things can happen. But in order to do it, I think it's going to be exciting to see which ones do what and how you do it. But having them all in the same bed will be good for an eye comparison, you know, like a real time comparison, because all the growing conditions are about the same and all that stuff.
Yeah, I don't think it has to be more than two, but, you know, whatever floats your boat, I do. One of my favorite tomatoes has become the pineapple tomato. Beautiful tomato. It's been great for my favorite salsa recipe. I'm going to thank you every time I bring up that salsa recipe.
You're welcome.
This is the beginning of the season. Don't hold me to this, y'all. So I am again trying single stemming. Yes, I said it. It's on record.
Me too.
And I have one plant for the pineapple that I plan on letting grow naturally. I mean, obviously, I'll be doing pruning as I always do. Then I have it's going to sit next to one that I plan on single stemming. And I'm so curious. This, I think, either last year or the year before, I attempted this and just didn't, you know, I ran out of steam pretty quickly into the season. But I'm really curious about the difference in these, what these plants are going to produce.
Yeah.
It's almost the test of the single stemming. I also do like the, you know, different varieties in that you can try something out. So you already have a bed that's dedicated to Brussels sprouts in this example. You could go ahead and try something out without having this whole dedication to, I'm going to grow a lot of it. You know, one thing that I always get caught in the trap of when someone describes a variety and says, hey, Batavia, it's going to address the thing that you've had trouble with. Like, that's what I hear when they describe the variety. And it's almost impossible for me just to look the other way and say, never mind, you know, no, it'll be fine. Right. Absolutely. I already have seeds for that plant, that type of vegetable. But here I am trying one more.
Hey, that's how it works.
Especially those vegetables that are a little bit harder to grow in general, you know, so.
Well, and I know you said you don't agree with the, you know, that you need to have more than two plants, but I'm going to get a little technical here. So eye rolling and all that stuff, please put it on pause. Scientifically, that's not how it's done. And so there's, you know, the craze this year is electroculture.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Have you,
I didn't know
have you
that.
seen? Yeah. So I've seen it like everywhere, and there's a couple people that are trying it now. You know, they'll do something like put a row, put electroculture here, go down, put electroculture here, go through. But when they test it, they do fields of it so that they can get like quantifiable amounts of data to compile next to each other. And so the more that you can do and make the variables, you know, the growing conditions and the variables the same, this, that, and the other, you can start to really get good data. And that's why I say, because how many times have you had a tomato plant just like drop dead on you? You know, just like a random tomato plant, you know?
Yeah, probably
so,
once
like,
every other season.
Yeah. And, you know, it's like, well, what happened? You know, well, I don't know what happened. But if you have multiples and you can kind of take out the ones that kind of just drop dead. So that's why I feel like if you really want to get a good idea about varieties and stuff like that, then you can. Now, that being said, you don't have to do a side-by-side. You can do it like 1 year or the next year. And having a whole bed of that really works out good too.
Excuse me. Now, I mean, I didn't realize we were, leaning towards doing like real scientific experiments.
Oh, bro, always.
Yeah, in that instance, of course, right? A sample size of 2 doesn't make any type of valid experiment. I think this is more of just kind of feel. And the reason why, if you think about even going year to year, like this is, again, I'm not writing any studies or anything like that and doing real analyses on this.
Yeah.
Memory ends up like playing tricks on you.
Yeah.
So last year it either will have been the best thing or like, oh, I couldn't believe insert whatever.
Yeah.
And then if you actually look back on some evidence, you're like, oh wait, hold on, that's not how I remembered it.
Yeah. That's the beauty of all these of camera phones, man. You can take pictures of them and you can go back and then it's undeniable what happened.
Yeah, I was looking at the broccoli that I planted, which basically earlier on you saw me looking out the window. I was counting the broccoli plants. And the second bed in the front yard garden, besides the volunteer sunflowers and volunteer potatoes, it has all broccoli plants, and then I put in 2 cabbage. And so I was just like, I got a little bit later restart. This spring has been so funky when it comes to the weather. So little rain. Actually, I was trying to catch it when I was watching television yesterday. I was in a store, and the news reporter, the weather person said, record low rains for May. And they actually quoted how little rain we got in comparison to what's normal. So anywho, I would say to myself, well, we'll see. I've not been able in these few years of growing broccoli to get broccoli to go past June. Like if I'm at June 30th, it's bolted, so I'm looking at the plants and saying, yeah, giddy up. Yeah. like this, the time is running short. And so, that instant concern goes in, and then I lean into the bed and I'm like, oh, they've already started forming heads. You're right on time.
Yeah.
I've just went through a whole thing. Just how I just talked through it with you was what was going on in my head, trying to justify why these plants look behind. And then I look in and I'm like, oh wait, hold on. And then I go back to last year, early June. I'm like, oh yeah, same. So.
Yeah, I think I'm going to do the same thing with broccoli this year too, because I want to eat broccoli. You know what I'm saying? But like,
sorry,
I want to be successful with it, but I really want to like grow broccoli and save seed from it. Mm-hmm. So it's like I want to grow like a hybrid with it, but then an heirloom with it, to kind of make sure that I get a harvest, a decent, something that gives big heads or something, and then have something that I'm like, oh, I like this one. Let me save the seed from it. You know what I mean? I'd like to do something like that. And by putting them in the same beds, I think it works out pretty well for me. I did that a lot this year. Like another reason why I wanted to switch to monocropping was because of cabbage. I had a hell of a time with cabbage getting shaded out or shading things out. That was my problem, So
yeah, cabbage, they're bullies.
They are, but if you grow them all together, it's not a worry. They're just going to shade each other out.
As long as you've done the spacing, right? Like they actually play pretty well kind of side by side. Again, if you get the spacing right. For me, it's like you really want a minimum of about 18 inches, probably more like 2 feet, because it's impossible to believe how big those plants get.
Not when you grow that brand I was growing this year.
Well, there is that. I was
my
typing.
Doorknobs.
Yeah, I was typing to you. So either I can't remember now, and I didn't make good notes of this. So I bought cabbage transplants, and I think I bought them from 2 different places. And so maybe they are 2 different, whatever the varieties are. You know how these places are just slapping a label on stuff, which is, again, one of the downsides of buying these plants versus starting them from seed. You know what you got. But anywho, I have 2 cabbage that are like last year's award-winning, go to the fair size. It's already in the making. Then I have 4, give Ben a run for his money for the smallest cabbage on earth. And so in my mind, I'm like, were these all part of the same package of cabbage? I feel like they were, but maybe they weren't because they're planted in 2 different spaces. Not that far off, but anywho, it would have been super cool if I would have planted them all in one row. and I would have known for sure, but here we are, you know.
Yeah, I'm doing the same thing this year. I'm going to do, I've got an heirloom and then a hybrid cabbage I'm going to plant side by side, whole bed to cabbage, especially now that I found a way for my son to eat it. But look.
How's that?
He likes to eat boiled. He likes boiled cabbage. Who would have thought that? Simple.
Yeah, never would have thought that.
A little bit of salt, a little bit of pepper, and a pat of butter, and he's good to go. So we're going to definitely lean in on that one.
Yeah, yeah.
But we do need to talk about the cons of monocropping now. So we've already lifted it up on its pedestal, but I think we need to take a couple notches off of it and see if we can tear it down. What do you think?
I'm here for it.
So go ahead.
Disease.
Yeah.
That's probably there's a second close. I can't tell in this moment which is worse, though. So go ahead. What's your next?
Well, I mean, my whole thing with it is I mean, it's in line with that, but it would be total crop failure.
Oh.
Like you've just lost your entire tomato crop. You know, I mean, that's kind of the issue with that is once you lose that bed, that's all she wrote. And I think disease is a perfect one because it jumps from plant to plant to plant. I can treat for a pest.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can do anything for a disease.
Yeah.
So that's a big one, man. And I think that takes it down a couple notches in my mind.
I have that small narrow row of those itty bitty cabbage that are growing. Saw cabbage worms on one of them and said, oh, and then waited, didn't cover them, didn't treat it. Now all four of them have it, you know, so the disease is the same way, right? Like if it persists, then it's going to take out that same type of crop. The other bit was, which I didn't think about, total crop failure, which is absolutely a thing. I have thought about it. Don't get me wrong, right? But like the completely sapping out the nutrients for, again, note heavy feeder crops, right? You know, I think that depleting your soil is right up there when it comes to disease, because that disease is likely going to impact this year. If you are impacting your soil, that could be many years over. So there is that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that one, but I will say this as well. You can also manage that with planting and stuff like that. So that's manageable.
Yeah,
but it's still a level of complexity that, I mean, it does need to be talked about and thought about.
Yeah.
Because that gets very complex. I mean, it's like, okay, I put in this heavy feeder. Now, what can I put behind it? You know, but I think too that I don't want to make it a benefit, but I think it would make you a better gardener as long as you focus on stuff like that. I think in the long run, it'll help you. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends on what your headspace is. I was So an officer stopped by, rode by and said, oh, can I stop? Can I take a look at your garden? I'm like, yeah, girl, come on. So she comes out and we're talking for a bit. And then she's like, another officer that I work with, he works, a different shift. He's definitely into gardening. And so a couple of days later, I was out that morning, because I'm an early riser. I mean, this is like 7 o'clock if I'm really honest. So that's not that early. And so another police truck rolls by and kind of slows down. I mean, it's 7 o'clock. There's no trouble on this block at that time. And so
that starts at 7:30.
Yeah, 7:30. That's gotta get those videos shot by then. No, absolutely not on a holiday weekend. 7:45 is the latest. And so rolls down the window and I'm like, oh, do you know Officer so-and-so, so-and-so? So anyway, it's the guy that she mentioned. So he comes out and we're chatting, and it's his first year gardening. And you could see it in his face. He's just like, I want to get something out of it. Yeah. And so, and that, it seemed like he was being realistic, saying like, I don't need to feed the neighborhood, just something, right? You know? And that's very different than, what we were just talking about and learning the lesson. And if you have some woes, you're going to be a better gardener. Like, ain't nobody out here trying to learn life lessons, when the alternative is get food, So
hey, look, I am.
I think you grow into that.
Well, yeah, exactly, and that's part of that whole evolving garden thing. I definitely think that it will, you know, as you get more and more into gardening over the years, I mean, I don't care who you are. If you grow one tomato plant and then you want to do that every year, you're going to get pretty damn good at growing that tomato plant, and you're going to learn the tricks to make it better and better every year. You know what I mean? Because you get addicted to that, the flavor and the art of it and the reward system behind it.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
I think it comes natural.
I think if we're going to go ahead and jump back onto, you know, the year of 2022 in tomatoes, that was another part of
I wasn't going to do that.
I know you weren't. That was another reason why it was so difficult, because like I got it, like I can grow tomatoes, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, and so that's what makes it even more difficult. But I think if I'm going to go with one more, like it depends on what day you ask me, could be considered a con. I think monocropping almost forces you into crop rotation. Versus if you think about like you're absolutely doing interplanting, like everything is mixed together, it doesn't quite matter, because where that tomato plant is in this bed this year is probably going to be on the other side next year as you move things around. Like it kind of naturally, you're mixing things up. Whereas if you have a bed that's absolutely full of potatoes this year, well, you know, should you really, which now that I think about it out loud, I was just talking about moving my tomatoes to the space I'm growing potatoes this year, which isn't recommended. So again, not only are you, because you have single crops potentially in one growing space, so you need to move them next year in theory. And then are you moving them to a place that also has single crops growing, and do they play well together?
Yeah.
So again, it makes it, let's say that it can make year over year gardening a little bit more complex.
Yeah, you know, I don't buy into companion planting completely. I don't buy into, you know, a lot of different things in the gardening that is made popular. But one thing I do buy into is crop rotation. Now, I will say this. If you don't want to rotate crops or practice that or care about it, then yeah, that is a big downfall behind it. Because if you just go out there and you plant cabbage out there this year and then next year and next year and the next year and next year, you will have that total crop failure eventually. I mean, would you be safe to say that's almost a guarantee at some point that it's just not going to be able to take it?
I think it's just going to catch up with you. I think that's what I think. I'm being strategic in the way that I'm planting my brassicas, my cold crops, and the challenge. My collards, let's start there. But the challenge I'm facing is, as I've expanded over these years, I'm growing more than collards. So it was really originally just collards and then cabbage. Those were the only brassicas I was growing. Okay, you fold in kale. But when you start to expand and think about what you grow in a spring garden, like a lot of those are all in the same family.
Yeah.
You know, so now my space is starting to get eaten up, no pun intended, you know, by the same crop. But I say that to say I'm absolutely, and I've mentioned this before, there's a fungus that can set in your soil. I've not seen it, but if it does, it could take years to beat it. And since I'm running from that, I'm trying to be proactive, absolutely, for those crops. But I also have said time and time again, I've grown tomatoes in this space year over year, not had trouble. And the quiet part that you have to say out loud is until you do.
Exactly.
Like,
exactly. And then you're like, well, damn, that sucks. You know, because the disease doesn't happen in the beginning. It's at the end when you start getting to the finish line and you're like, crap, I have to take it all out. So, you know, as far as, well, there is actually one more con I can give it. And I would say that, I mean, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but there's not as much aesthetic beauty opportunities within that. Meaning, you know, a bed of cabbage is a bed of cabbage. Like, I find that beautiful, but you may not. You know, you may want to put something else in there, you know, a different row alternating or something to make it that way. So I think that is it. But I will say that as far as like as you go down and you list them, like just by the sheer number of cons, there's not a lot. But what there is, I mean, it's very risky. You know what I mean? And I think like around me, we've got a couple farms around us. Man, They plant one year, they don't plant the next. Nothing.
The same crop.
No, nothing.
Oh, okay.
And then they plant the next year, and then they don't plant anything the next. Now, they may have different plots of land. It may be the same person owns all these plots around us, but that's how they work it. And so it's interesting to see that, you know what I mean? Because I was like, oh, hold up. Y'all ain't even farming this year.
Yeah,
like, man, must be nice.
Well, the respecting of like how much they're pulling out of the soil, you know, to grow, how intense whatever it is they're growing is. I get it. I think when you look at, you know, if I had the space to do it, I believe I'd grow single things in single spaces. You know,
what does that mean?
Meaning, you know, if I had 30 rows, I'd have 30 different crops in each of those rows.
Oh, yeah.
You
like
know?
in a big plot of land, like just a basic square or something.
Yeah, so if you treat a row as a garden bed, so to speak, then I absolutely would be, you know, still practicing. And again, there's a little bit of bastardizing the use of monocropping in this, but single row would have a single thing, period. I wouldn't need to, or I wouldn't end up, you know, for the aesthetic purposes of growing some tall plant with some shorter plant. No, at that stage, I'm in it for the vegetables. I'll find beauty in some other space, you know, that I'm planting in or growing in or whatever have you.
Right. And I mean, this year we got a taste of a couple months of not buying produce, and I want to chase that dragon. You know what I mean? So that's where we're kind of leaning towards it. But so let me ask you this. Now that we've laid it all out, would you monocrop more or not change anything and just do a little bit of this, a little bit of that?
I think I'll be monocropping more because interestingly enough, I said it, you know, it forces you into crop rotation, and I've just been pinched and my arms have been twisted and, you know, like bruised and battered into it. And it's the easiest way I can look at to manage that.
So that's what really led you into it, is the crop rotation aspect?
Well, no, led me into the idea of doing more, to answer your question, yes. But the idea of what led me stumbling into monocropping to begin with is just, it was easier for me to not only plant, maintain, but also harvest. Like the entire gamut of it was easier when I had one space with one thing.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, I mean, I'm sure everybody's like, shocker, but I'm going to do more of it. But the reason is just because of the ease of it, how much easier it makes things on me. And I'm starting to see that now as I'm doing more of it. There are definitely my biggest challenge so far is getting things planted behind the beds. Like right now it's June and I'm going to have 3 empty beds in the beginning of June. I have never had 3 empty beds. And then in another month and a half, I'm going to have a whole nother empty bed, you know? And then in another month and a half after that, I'm going to have a whole nother empty bed. And then I'll probably have another one because all my squash will die. So it's like, it's going to be some rapid succession business going on here, but it's also leaving me to where I think, and I know we talked about this in the last episode about planting fall earlier. I think it's going to lead me down that path to be able to plant my fall earlier. And I mean, this year I'm going to get my Brussels sprouts in 2 months earlier than I normally do. So that's 2 months of growth that I can get. No, 3 months of growth that I can get before I did last year. So
the timing of this has continued. As long as I've known you, it's been a struggle for me. As long as I've known you, I've had at some point in the year a completely empty garden bed. In that moment of like, well, what do I plant now? I did just have a oh shit moment because I realized I was talking about like what I'd be planting in preparation for fall, and I still am not sure if it's early June or late June that I need to be starting some of these things. And I'm just going to start seeds. Like I can't have a repeat of what I did late winter this year, kind of waiting and waiting. So I'm just going to start. And some of these plants are going to be too big. I had mentioned this, but I had a bunch of plants off topic that were root bound, that got planted, were root bound. And now I'm looking like, oh, got to pull them, you know, like they're done, you know? And so anywho, I say that to say, a bed that's not going to grow the entire season as you decide to plant that bed out, you better be thinking about what's going to go in after it.
Right. And I think that's the important, that's my challenge. And I think that's going to continue to be a challenge. But as we grow more each year, I'll get better at it. You know, I'm marking this down that it's the beginning of June and I've harvested my onions and my potatoes. So I can kind of keep that going and say, okay, beginning of June, expect this. Might be a little after, might be a little bit before, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I think it's going to work out good in my favor. I really hope so. But on that being said, everybody, if you're going to monocrop, go until your heart's content and put one plant at a time in that garden. And remember, check out the Planter app, become a patron, become an Apple subscriber if you want. Hell, it's only one click and help support the show. We will give you an extra episode a month, but you can also be feeling good knowing that you're helping support us and continue to learn to grow and grow for change.
See ya.
Now you know why people feel like celebrating at harvest time.
All over the world, people have feasting and good times when the crops have been gathered in.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for checking out the Backyard Gardens podcast.
If you like what we're doing and you want to continue to support the podcast, head over to our Patreon page to sign up.
You can also make a one-time donation using PayPal. Both of these links are in the description.
With your support, we can continue growing and helping others in their gardens. See ya.
If you guys want some Backyard Gardens gear,
Go to the link below and check out our t-shirts, mugs, pint glasses, and other gear.
all purchases go towards helping to support the show, so thank you so much in advance, and we hope you enjoy. We want everybody to have a garden, and we're going to give you a chance to win free seeds every month.
Head over to backyardgardenstv.com and enter your email address to be entered in all of our giveaways.
Good luck!
We want you to be a part of our gardening community. DM us a picture of your garden at Backyard Gardens TV on Instagram, and we will share it with our listeners.